Okay, so this should be a bit more of an interactive storage provider meetup this time. I see the chat is already popping off. We will have a Kahoot later, but I'll make sure that we're all kind of situated first. And I'm going to speak and monologue a bit before we get there. But this should be fun. All right. So I'll kind of give an overview of what we're going to touch on today. So as I alluded later toward the end, we're going to have a Kahoot. So make sure that if possible, you're kind of situated at either a desktop or somewhere where you could have both the stream up, because I will be sharing my screen when we get to that part. So you could be viewing both my stream and you could have a Kahoot web tab open. So if you're on mobile, you might struggle kind of seeing both at the same time. So desktop is probably the best way, or desktop and mobile, some kind of combination, just some way to be both watching the stream and have Kahoot open. But I did put together practice Kahoot. So for those of you who are totally new to it or aren't sure of the format, there will be a little bit of help with that learning curve. Anyway, before we get to all the fork talk, which there will be fork talk, you best believe, just going to touch on some of the stuff going on the storage provider side of the network. So we are still running our basic to full upgrade. So that is the best, and that's the best deal we've offered so far, and is probably going to be the best deal we ever offer on that package. So you can upgrade from basic to full license for $150 plus rebate remit. I believe you also get 1,000 SPFB out of that deal. So that's a pretty awesome and enticing package. I've already heard from a number of storage providers that have taken us up on that deal. Heard a lot of good things and kind of compliments toward the developers on how good the Examiner full license software is. Kind of takes a lot of the legwork out of being a storage provider. And even though it's already in a very good state, we are also working toward kind of a new enhanced full license installer and software version. So yeah, look forward to that in probably the next couple of weeks. Really happy to be able to offer that kind of promotion, and definitely if you're still on a basic license, that's okay. I think, oh yeah, now I'm having to think about what we've announced since the last one 2 weeks ago. So I think since we last had the storage provider meetup, I believe we ended the last call a little bit ominously, alluding that there was some news that was coming that would maybe not be super warmly received by basics, by the basic licenses. So we have made that announcement since, and the news was that incentives, the generous 75 SCP per terabyte incentives that we've been offering on used storage for the last year and a half. Well, I think when it actually over a year and a half, it was even more generous. But we've pegged it to 75 for the last year. Those will be ending just for basic licenses. So they will still get their base $4 of rent payments. That's done through the blockchain. That's through a separate channel. So that's going to continue. You will always get your rent payment, but just specifically the bonus incentives that we were using to kind of subsidize, those will be no longer continuing for basics. So that news came out about a week and a half ago. And that was kind of paired along with the news of the basic to full upgrade package. So that's $150 plus rebate remit. You get 1,000 SPFB. It's a pretty sweet deal. I think all of you will like the full license software. I've heard very good things from the people who have gone out of their way to upgrade. Even people that never particularly struggled with the basic license, but it's just kind of nice to have software that feels like it was written in 2023 and not 1993, which is kind of the command line experience. But anyway, so that's a thing. And while that's very exciting, it doesn't even come close to the most exciting thing that has happened this past week. So, well, full fork talk is coming. Just going to tease a little bit longer with, well, still talking about the fork, but just in how it pertains to storage providers. So most of our network did a good job of upgrading to 1.8.0. So big pat on the back to all of you for that. I think it was 95+%, something like that, upgraded to 1.8.0 in time. There were a couple stragglers that updated in the couple days after the fork. I think most of them were able to kind of come out okay, but it was a bit of doing surgery in order to make that conversion. And unfortunately, there are still some storage providers that have not updated. A disproportionate amount of them are basic licenses, so do with that information what you will. But yeah, most of the network made it to 180. We're pretty happy with that. Obviously, all the data that we give out to you guys, we do expect to still be available, and it's not just a one-way street. We hope you are good stewards of our data, and we'll update when it's time to update without too much drama. So yeah, most of you are on 180. Those of you who aren't, please urgently do something about that. At this point, it might already be too late, but if you just kind of tune in and realize that, oh crap, I'm still on 170 or 172, something like that, pop into our Discord in the support channel. There is an appropriate place for that. Don't just come screaming in every channel. There is a right place, and we'll sort you out, because we do want your data, and I'm hoping that you want your data. It's kind of weird sometimes when we seem to want people to succeed more than they do. But anyway, for those of you who use the web wallet, the updated web wallet has been available for the last 2 weeks. I believe the fork ready version is 0.34. So please, if you are using the web wallet in any capacity, just make sure that your web wallet version is on the latest. If you're on an older version, you could end up in kind of a weird situation where you send coins, but it's on the wrong chain, and then they don't show up at the exchange, and nobody's happy. So just please update to either 0.34, or by the time you're watching this, if there's a version that's even higher than that out, then upgrade to that. I see the audience has grown in size quite a bit since I first started talking there. So, oh, I see an announcement went out. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad all of you are here, because we will be giving away live on this show an SC box, a Goldshell SC box. That will be given away in a Kahoot that we're going to run later in this show. You're going to have to listen to me jabber along first. But what I will say, for those of you who want to maximize their chances to win a Goldshell SC box, which I know I would, and for those of you who are listening to this kind of after the fact, or have a friend listening in, telling them about it, but they can't listen along live, there are 2 other ways to win a Goldshell SC box. So let me grab the appropriate links for these. I will plug these links basically everywhere I can, because I don't want people to miss this. So if you're watching the YouTube recording, it'll be at the top of the description. There should be 2 links. I just dropped these in the chat for the live theater. There should be 2 links. One is a kind of Discord themed one is a Twitter themed one. These are kind of a giveaway link, so you open the form, put in some contact info. You don't need to submit your social insurance or anything. This just needs to be sufficient that we can contact you if you do win. So please at least put the bare minimum in there. But the main thing is, so join our Discord in order to get an entry, and follow our Twitter to have an entry. Steve, the comedian, says he already has 30 entries. I don't think that's possible, so I'm assuming that's a joke. You should be able to, everyone just kind of get 1 entry from either the Discord or the Twitter. So you can double your odds by doing both. So yeah, that wraps up on Sunday. I think I originally had scheduled those giveaways to wrap up right when this call started, about 15 minutes ago. And then I was going to do a live draw. That was the original plan, but I extended these out another 48 hours to Sunday, because I wanted to make sure that the most people possible kind of got a fair chance to enter this giveaway. I figured it hadn't reached as many eyes as it could have, so now that I'm plugging it here on the Storage Provider Meetup, I've put it in the chat for this live event. When this goes on YouTube, I'm going to put it in the description. I just want to make sure that everybody gets a fair shake at entering it. So you have an extra 48 hours to enter. Don't lollygag, but at the same time, I think that's fair to everybody. Where do I even begin this one? I'll probably start with some of the most urgent information first, so I'll deal with the mining pool situation. So, I think let's establish first the very basic facts. So we had, for a long time, the last couple of months, we've had 3 main mining pools on our network. We had Sia Mining, which was typically the largest. We had DX Pool, which joined us last fall. They're a mainly kind of Asian-based mining pool, but they have a ton of different coins that they're mining. So they're kind of a large multi-pool. They've listed, like 15 to 20 other very large projects. They have generally well-run pools, and they seem to kind of appeal mainly to the Asian mining scene. And then there was SC Prime Pool, who's run by a community member known to us, who's like fairly active in the community. And that's kind of USA based. He then later set up a EU pool, also under that SC Prime Pool brand. So he's kind of a friend of the project. DX Pool is also kind of a friend of us. We, behind the scenes, they're pretty responsive to our messages. So we certainly appreciate that. But Sia Mining, the largest pool on our network, has been basically uncontactable for several years at this point, which has been kind of an issue. And that issue ultimately came to kind of the worst case that we were hoping to avoid, but it did happen this past week with our fork, where they did not update their software, which meant that at the fork block height, the other two pools continued on with the fork chain, which is what we were expecting to happen. That was the chain that the vast majority of our storage network went on. That was that went to plan. But unfortunately, there was a situation where Sia Mining didn't update their nodes. They stayed on the old 170 chain, which meant that all the blocks that they were mining were worthless because they were not the same chain that all of our exchanges were on. They were not the same exchange, or they were not the same chain that our storage network was on. It was, just kind of going off into a ghost direction. So that's not an ideal situation. I think at this point, Sia Mining has realized their mistake, and they have shut down their pool. So I would encourage you. I was originally going to come on and say that if you are mining on Sia Mining, to check out either DX Pool or SC Prime Pool. At this point, I don't even think anyone is mining on Sia Mining. I think they're just fully shut down. But if you have a miner that's capable of still running after this fork, then please consider either DX Pool or SC Prime Pool. And there are links and resources for finding both of those. I personally use a website called Mining Pool Stats. I think it's miningpoolstats.stream, but if you just Google Mining Pool Stats, I'm sure it'll come up. And that's a super helpful website. It kind of visualizes on any particular network. So you do have to then plug in SC Prime network specifically on that site. But then it kind of tracks across the different pools how big they are, like how many blocks they're finding, when they found them. It has links to them. It even shows you like what the fee percent is on each pool. So that's just kind of all sorts of helpful info that you might be interested in if you're picking a pool. I encourage you to check that out. I see it was plugged in the chat for the theater here as well. So that's kind of I've hit you with the action item before I hit you with the information item, which is maybe a little bit of a weird order to go in, but we're going to roll with it. So kind of taking a step back, actually, and why did we do the fork? Who can even mine today? Or what miners can run today that maybe couldn't? What miners can't run now that could last week? That kind of thing. Okay. So, kind of taking a step back. So this past Monday, we had our mining algorithm change fork executed. It went off generally successfully. It was just that one hiccup with the mining pool that didn't update, but that's kind of settled now, or the dust is just about settled on that one. So this fork, the change that was made to the network and the algorithm, it was a very slight tweak, and it was one that actually, to people who have been around in this space, is familiar, because we did the same fork that another storage network of similar architecture to ours made about 4.5 years ago. Don't know how deep into the history I really want to go with that one. Don't want to put everybody to sleep, but essentially, everybody knows that our blockchain runs on miners. It's proof of work mining. These miners all agree to use the same hashing algorithm in order to derive their cryptographic proofs that solve blocks that then give validity to the blockchain. Made a couple leaps there, so don't worry about it if you don't totally know what all those words mean. But the important part there is that all of the miners are kind of running on the same cryptographic hash algorithm. So every block that is mined is using the same version or the same protocol in order to find their proofs. So what we changed, and the significance of it, what we changed was that the algorithm is the same in order to find those proofs, but the number that you come up with as a proof, in order to remain valid, after the fork, the number has to be divisible by 1009. So that sounds really arbitrary, but I'm going to explain to you the significance of that step. So back in 2018 or so, when we were but an idea in the brain of our creators as SC Prime, the original network that we kind of forked out of is called Sia Coin, or just Sia. They had an interesting mining situation, so they use the same algorithm that we use, and they ran into a situation where the team behind that network were developing their own ASICs, but some other larger manufacturers beat them to the punch and flooded the network with kind of low-cost, very efficient ASIC miners, and made so many of them to the point where basically nobody was profitable. They put like 100 terahash on the network at a point where the coin price had already, like, it was kind of entering the 2018-19 bear market, where prices were low. So it just created a kind of crummy situation where there was a ton of hash available, but all of it was not valued particularly highly. Like, it was next to worthless. No one was really making any profit. And for the team behind Sia, who had put all this effort and taken community money, that's another important part of it. A lot of the community had purchased the devices that this team was making. So put them in a tough situation where there were these ASICs out there that were better than their own ASICs, but no one was really turning profit in the whole thing. It kind of sucked. So what they ended up doing, they had, in secret, implanted a little tweak in the chips of their own developed ASICs called obelisks. And this little tweak made it so that their ASICs could either mine, it could mine the same function that all the other miners mined, but it could also do, at the flip of a kind of software switch, it could also mine the same algorithm, but only produce solutions that were divisible by the number 1009. And 1009, obviously being a prime number, means that you can't easily, like, no combination of smaller numbers can produce 1009. So you can't do any trickery with, like, okay, well, if I, just carry a couple bits over here and there, then I can produce something that's divisible by 1009 every time. It doesn't really work like that. They intentionally picked a number that you couldn't piece together out of smaller components. And that's where the 1009 comes from. So that network back in fall of 2018 put forth that fork, and it kicked off a whole bunch of hash rate. I believe they went from 95 terahashes per second on their network. No, I keep saying terahash, petahashes. I think it was 95 petahashes per second of hash rate, and then it dropped to like 1.5. So they lost like 90+% of their hash rate on their network. Pretty dramatic drop. And after that, all that was left on their network were these devices that could mine with that little 1009 trick, which at the time was their own hardware. Now, that was a long time ago. There is a lot I could get into as well about fall 2018, because that whole fiasco, that kind of situation, a lot kind of came to a head at that point that even resulted in the creation of our network as kind of an alternative to Siacoin, as kind of a different take on distributed storage, from people that were a little frustrated by the direction over there, by the focus, by some of the decisions. That kind of led to our network being created, and that's why we share some of the same DNA as Siacoin, but we vary in other places. That's kind of the compressed version of how that situation came to be. So, okay, that's all historical. That all happened like 4+ years ago. What's happened since then, our network chose, when we launched in the fall of 2018, we chose to pick the version of the algorithm that didn't have the 1009 thing. So we chose to uh, support the version of the mining protocol that all the miners at the time could use. So including the ones like the 95 plus petahashes per second of mining horsepower that was out there. So we chose that version. We kind of figured at the time that it made sense to not really care who made the machine behind the miner. We just kind of figured if you can bring your hash power, we'd be happy to take it. And we kind of expected that by making that choice, we would end up attracting a lot more of the hash power than we ended up attracting. Now that's due to a number of different factors, all of which we still don't entirely know, because uh, a lot of the scheming and planning and things kind of happen behind the scenes that we still don't really know. But we ended up with less hash power than we expected, and unfortunately, since then, for the last like 4 years or so, we've kind of stayed down there. We never attracted the kind of hash rate that we expected to. The only time we got kind of a glimpse of it, and it almost kind of scared us. It did actually, was in January of 2022 when our coin price peaked, and suddenly out of the woodwork, we launched from like 1 or 2 petahashes per second up to 19. And that was kind of concerning because we had kind of assumed at that point it had been like 3+ years since most of that hash rate went offline. We kind of figured that most of it would have been in a recycling plant by then or in some kind of scrapyard. But it turned out that a large portion of it was still kind of under control of people that could bring it online when they wanted to. And that was kind of concerning to us because we didn't know really who those players were. We kind of heard some things behind the scenes of who might be in control of some of that hash power, but it made us a little uneasy and not be able to sleep super well at night, knowing that there was still, of that original like 95 petahashes, there was still a large amount of it available that could dominate kind of our network at any point in time. So that made us not feel great about the whole situation. At the end of the day, for most networks, what they are concerned of, I mean, I think most people in kind of crypto or blockchain are familiar with the concept of a 51 attack. So that's when somebody who is able to produce around 50% or more of the hash rate on a network. They can pretty much do whatever they want with it. They can change the rules. They can do all sorts of exploits, double spends. They can kind of bend the network to their will because they, by being the largest, like by being more than 50% of the hash power, they essentially are the network. So that's kind of a familiar concept within this space. But what is kind of new and distinct for us is that we have this whole storage network built on top. So our contracts, all of our storage providers, all the data flowing through our network, that's all kind of built on a layer on top of this blockchain thing. And the 51 attack concept has some scary kind of implications for our storage network. So for a normal crypto, if they get 51 attacked, like never a good situation. That's pretty much always a kind of a nightmare situation. But there is at least some sort of precedence for being able to like do a rollback. You can take kind of like blockchain snaps. Typically, you know what block height you started being attacked at, so everyone can just kind of agree to undo some of that damage. And ideally, although it's still nightmare situation every time, there is still a way to kind of come back from that. But what made us really concerned is that because of our storage network built on top, we are doing real world things with the utility on top of our network. So we have data that is moving to people's hard drives, that there's accounting being done on top of that, that's being reported on the blockchain. There's contracts that are being formed, resolved, modified, and it becomes a really messy situation if you start thinking about what would a 51 look like on a network like this. It's the answer is, unfortunately, it looks really bad, and there maybe isn't a way to even recover from one, at least not cleanly. So that made us that really had our full attention. That was kind of a scary thought. we didn't really know a way forward that didn't involve essentially, yeah, taking control of that hash power back into back into hands that we knew that we could kind of trust, where there weren't just large swaths of dark hash power sitting out there that people that we didn't know could use and control our network anytime they wanted. So that kind of motivated our decision that we'd been kind of thinking about all the way back to last year. Like, I think we even put out a blog post last December where we were musing on all of this, where we kind of discussed the situation. We said we were thinking about this change, but we wanted to give lots of notice to the various community members, to partners, to people that maybe had large amounts of ASIC machines. We wanted to give them lots of notice and time to kind of understand our thoughts, to promote a conversation, to think about it. We didn't want this to be kind of an urgent decision that was made. We wanted this to be, we wanted to do it the right way. So we did that. Late last year, we put out that blog post. Our thoughts have kind of evolved as conversations have taken place since then. But we finally reached a point where we figured that it was probably the right time to actually go ahead and make that fork put on a specific timeline. So we set for May 15th was our kind of fork day that we decided, and on that day we made it so all of the machines that did not have that special 1009 mining ability became no longer able to participate on our network, and the machines that did have that 1009 little feature were able to continue. So at this point, since the 1009 thing has kind of been mainstream for like 4+ years now, there was a large number of machines that are available that can mine that. So all of the current Goldshells could mine before and can continue to, because they have that special 1009 ability. Essentially, any SIA ASIC that has been produced since 2019 can mine on our network because they have that little 1009 special ability. But all of the ASICs from 2018 or earlier, I mean, I say earlier, I think they're all from 2018, then all of them cannot. So that's namely the InnoSilicon S11. There's like a Strong U model, like the U2, I think. The Bitmain A3, all of those can no longer mine. So they might be able to find a home on some other network. That doesn't really concern us. What does concern us is that it's just not ours. And that is now the case. So we do still have ASICs on the network. We're happy with that. That's not changing. They all are just no longer like 5+ year old models that have largely been sitting in warehouses for most of their lives. They are now kind of the current generation of Goldshells, or I think there's an IB Link model. There's a couple kind of maybe one-offs or kind of weird ones out there, but mainly Goldshell is the name that you're going to see. And Goldshell has been very responsive with us. They're good partners. They're good stewards in the ASIC mining community. They seem to kind of do things the right way, from what we can tell anyway. And I do appreciate that they offer these kind of SC box units that are kind of lower power. They're much more home miner friendly. So for those of you who have tried foraying into ASIC mining, I'm sure you've kind of noticed that they tend to be really loud, and they tend to use tons of power and electricity and all those kinds of things that make it a little complicated for running at home. So these little SC boxes, they're kind of neat. They're like anywhere from 2 to 400 watts or so. You can run it on kind of a normal desktop power supply, or you can, still go with like a server power supply if you want. But you kind of have the choice. You don't need specialized electrical circuits or anything. They're kind of neat, and I like that Goldshell is making that mainstream again, because that's, if you go way back to like 2013 or 14, that's kind of where ASIC started out. There was no concept of like industrial scale mining at that point. It was all just people running it kind of out of their basements. And I kind of like that Goldshell is, well, they do have those industrial scale miners still. Like the SC6 is, that's a beast of a miner. That's like 3,000 watts, pretty high-end miner. But I like that these little home miners are kind of mainstream again. They're cool. And we're going to be giving one away in a little bit. Okay, So where I want to head next before we do the Kahoot is to kind of talk about our medium to long term roadmap. So for those of you who have been tracking pretty closely in our Discord, which I know is probably a lot of the audience that's listening live right now, but I want to take some time out of one of these storage provider calls to really kind of discuss some of what we've been kind of hinting at or directly saying for the last little while. I want to talk about what we're expecting to kind of happen to our network in 2024 and 2025. Figure that this is probably an appropriate chance to talk about that now that we've kind of made this fork that, or we've finally executed on the fork that we're no longer kind of weighed down. We're kind of not looking back. We have a chance to look forward and see what's kind of coming. So where we're at now, kind of want to touch on one of the biggest items on that list, which is that we plan to move to another dedicated L1 or L2 network in 2024 or 2025. So the significance of that, what that kind of means, as I've said earlier, our whole storage network today is running kind of on top of this blockchain level network that that has taken up so much of our discussion here today. So that blockchain network is mined using proof of work ASIC miners, and they are validating the blocks that allow our contracts to form. They allow people to send, they allow us to pay providers, they allow contracts to resolve, they allow storage proofs to be posted. All of these kinds of events that we need to take place and be executed at a blockchain level, they are currently run on our own kind of L1 or layer 1 network, meaning that we are not based in Ethereum, we're not based in Solana, we're not based in any of the other kind of backbone projects. We're not based in any of the other L1s or L2s. We are running on our own blockchain, which back in the day when men were men, that was how real crypto projects did it. I jest, but yeah, it is kind of on our roadmap. It's getting an increasing amount of our attention. That it does seem like there are other L1 or L2 networks that are dedicated to just being good platforms for other networks to do things like this. So, namely, Ethereum is probably the biggest dedicated kind of L1 network out there, whose whole thing is to kind of run and service and be a good platform for other networks and other applications to build on. So, certainly, Ethereum has our attention. There are a couple others that that we're looking at as well. We don't feel that there are any obvious choices at this point, at least in the sense that like we don't think that there's really a front runner today. We expect that there's probably going to be a front runner at some point in the next year or two. So Ethereum, while it's getting better, it still has some downsides. Like whenever anybody buys some NFT rock JPEG or something, then the gas price fees go up because that's more competition for the same space in the block. There are other L1s or L2s that don't have that much of don't have those kinds of problems, where they can handle much more throughput, many more transactions per second, or they can handle them much more cheaply. But some of them have issues. Like I know Solana, I think, is somewhat infamous for they have stoppages every so often where just the whole blockchain comes to a halt while they figure out some problem. And that seems not super ideal either. So yeah, there's our list today is probably 4 or 5 networks that we're kind of looking at. Those aren't necessarily the 4 or 5 that we're going to still be looking at a year from now, but we are kind of keeping along and keeping an eye on the L1 and L2 competition. And once it becomes obvious that there's kind of one that seems to have all the important factors figured out, then we're expecting to kind of start transitioning over to potentially kind of uplifting our network and moving it over and dropping it on one of those networks. That would be a very large, that'd be a significant transition. So once we start work on that, there will be lots of time or lots of notice before that actually comes to be. So this is, yeah, like a probably 18 or 24 month out kind of thing. That's why we've kind of put it as 2024, 2025. this is not happening in the immediate future, but uh, for these kinds of things to happen in 2024, 2025, we need to be looking at it now, and we are. So that's why I figured I'd tell you all about it. So what does a transition like that kind of look like? So uh, it's obviously, yeah, a very large move in order to pick up our whole active storage network and drop it on another piece of infrastructure, kind of pick up the car and drop it on another engine. That's a big move. So what we're expecting to do first, as kind of a stepping stone, and to give a bit of a trial run to one of these L1s or L2s, we're expecting to kind of lead that move with SPF. So hopefully you're familiar with SPF. You've probably heard me talk about it lots in these storage provider calls, but it's kind of the token on our network that earns kind of passive income, or it earns yields and dividends from all the storage contracts on the network. So it's a pretty nice token to have. You earn a small cut across all of the contracts on the whole network indefinitely. So it's a pretty sweet kind of passively yielding token to have. And we are expecting that to kind of lead the charge onto another L1 or L2 once we make that decision. So by moving that SPF over first, hopefully whatever kind of liquidity markets are on these other L1s or L2s will gain exposure to as well. So it'd be pretty neat if SC Prime could be kind of integrated to some of these liquidity pools. So like the DeFi swap market is pretty large, so it'd be cool to be able to access that pretty natively. These kinds of things. But there are other advantages as well that we want to do. So probably whenever we start thinking about making that move to another L1 or L2, we are also going to want to think about consensus mining. So right now we're proof of work mined. Proof of work is not perfect, but we figure it's probably kind of the best option of the mainstream ones today. It's certainly the most kind of tried and proven one. So, it's not perfect, and we would ultimately like to move to proof of stake, and we think that SPF probably makes sense as the natural token for kind of staking and for governance. That's kind of our thinking today. So that would be another place where it makes sense to kind of migrate that ahead of the other things onto a new L1 or L2. So yeah, it'd be nice to, hopefully if you have SPF, you're now kind of looking at them and smiling and being glad that you have them. And if you don't have SPF, then hopefully you're remembering at the start of the call when I mentioned that there is our basic to full license upgrade right now. That is kind of the best promotion we're probably ever going to run on that upgrade to full license. It does include some SPFB, so it'd be a good way to get in on some of our, obviously we're not committing to making any of these things happen. We're just kind of stating intent that we foresee in our future kind of a migration to another L1 or L2. We think that would help with our scalability. So running our own blockchain today, what that's allowed us to do, which is nice, is kind of have low transaction fees. So we're not competing for space in the same blocks that other blockchain networks are. Namely, this is kind of a meme, but it's also a little serious that whenever NFTs pop off, then Ethereum gas fees get really expensive, and suddenly doing like basic network functions can become much more costly. So by being on our own network, we're kind of avoiding that. But there are some kind of downsides as well, and that's the kind of performance and scalability. So performance and scalability on our network are good enough for today. When we have like the 3,000 storage providers, we still have some kind of headroom above that we're pretty confident we can plow into. But when we kind of start thinking about and talking about those 300,000 nodes or 3 million nodes that we think are entirely possible in kind of the next 2 or 3 years, then probably being on our own L1 at that point, then performance and scaling would start to become more of an issue and an L1 and L2 that's kind of specialized and dedicated to being able to handle that kind of volume. So some of the technologies that these networks are using are like zero knowledge proofs. They're using rollups. They're using like all sorts of neat kind of novel technologies that are becoming increasingly battle tested, even though in the grand scheme they are fairly new. Those are the kinds of technologies that have our attention and that these L1s and L2s that we're looking at are using. And it probably makes sense to just, rather than implementing all of that ourselves, just to kind of move over to a network that is catering themselves and has had lots of development already put into them as being able to handle this kind of thing. So that's kind of our thoughts on the 2023-2024 roadmap. So kind of migration to another L1, L2, SPF probably leading the charge. And kind of separately, apart from that kind of blockchain heavy discussion, another thing that we would like to do that might kind of coincide, might come before, we'll have to kind of see, is compute. So our network today obviously is kind of S3 like object storage. So that's a pretty important kind of underpinning piece for cloud data storage. But what we can do that would make our network kind of even more valuable. So obviously, there is value in being able to kind of host people's cloud data. That's something that people are using in huge amounts from AWS, from Microsoft, from Google. But what makes object kind of S3 object storage even more valuable and useful is if you can do things other than just like store, retrieve, kind of modify. But if you can actually perform computations on them, then that opens up all sorts of new possibilities. So we foresee kind of cloud compute becoming possible on our network. I think in a lot of ways we already have the infrastructure for it. The kind of contracts that we already have formed are kind of already serving as a proof of concept for it wouldn't take much to be able to just kind of modify them or tweak them to be able to support computing or computation operations as well. And to an extent, we already kind of have the infrastructure out there. So all of these storage providers that we have that are hooked up with however many terabytes, for the most part, the processors, the CPUs that are hooked up there, we haven't paid much attention to them because our network is pretty lightweight. And, some people have even gotten by with Raspberry Pi CPUs, even though we don't necessarily encourage that. But there's all these CPUs that are hooked up to our network too, that are mostly just kind of sitting around not doing much. And I know that there would be interest and the ability to tap into using some of that, or even GPU. And once you go GPU, that would be like, that opens up immense possibilities. Like, namely, I guess I'm going to have to say it, AI. I know that's kind of the big buzzword right now. That's almost a bit of a meme, but unironically, that is something that is possible with our infrastructure and would be really powerful. And there's all sorts of like synergy, I guess, to hit you with another buzzword. I'm sorry for hitting you with two in the span of 10 seconds, but there's some synergy with AI and blockchain and okay, I'm done. But seriously, these AI models are getting increasingly large, so they need to be stored somewhere. Not just the AI models, but certainly the training sets are getting into like terabytes, tens of terabytes, hundreds of terabytes. So those need to be stored somewhere. And hey, I know a pretty good network where you can store things performantly, cost effectively, and efficiently. And if suddenly you need a way to train it with some of those same concepts where because it's being offered kind of peer-to-peer, there's no middleman, then you can start training models, storing models, retrieving models, whatever you want, done kind of direct peer-to-peer very efficiently. All the same concepts that we've applied to S3 object storage carry over to compute and all the different kind of sub categories of compute as well. So I'm looking forward to that personally. That's kind of another thing that, we're doing some kind of science homework on, or some science projects on kind of internally. kind of studying the feasibility of it, some of the approaches that other networks have taken. Um, some of our community members have even brought up either in Discord or in these calls some of the names of other storage networks that are also looking at that kind of thing. So I think Flux or Crust or some of these other networks that maybe you've heard of, they're kind of also doing a similar thing. I personally don't know enough about them to really speak to the nuances or the differences. I'd imagine probably a lot of it is similar to the S3 object storage that we're doing now, where from the outside it can look like all these networks are kind of doing the same thing. But if you dive into it, and if you dive deep into it, you start to really appreciate some of the nuances and some of the differences between how the different networks have kind of structured themselves, how they function, how they um, deploy nodes, how they incentivize things. They can make really pronounced effects, even if from the outside they look pretty similar. So I'd imagine similar case over there too. Probably going to have to brush up on some of those networks before too long, because it'd be nice to be able to speak to them a little bit more from a position of knowing rather than just kind of speculating. So yeah, but I figured I'd kind of level with you guys on what we're looking at, what we're thinking about, the way we're approaching these kinds of changes. So hopefully, yeah, whenever in 2024, 2025, when these moves, whenever these decisions are actually coming to and bearing fruit, hopefully you'll kind of think back to in May of 2023 when you listen to that storage provider call and I was teasing all these ideas, because it's the start of a long road, but it is, to get to the end of it, you need to start somewhere. All right, I think I've kept you all in suspense long enough. I'm going to queue up the Kahoot here. Hey, Henry from the future here. So the rest of the storage provider meetup was a live Kahoot, which was a lot of fun and worked well at the time. We gave away a Goldshell SC box, but unfortunately it doesn't work quite as well in a recording format to watch after the fact. So I'm going to wrap the storage provider meetup here. Thank you for coming. I definitely joined the giveaway for the other two SC boxes at the top of the description of this video. Get entered there. We'll draw them on Sunday. Should be good. So thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And see you again in 2 weeks.